Some of you know that this is a long-awaited presentation, that it was scheduled to happen, and then instead we had COVID. And now I'm so delighted that we've managed to get through COVID, that even on this beautiful day, so many of you are here with us, and others joining by Zoom, and others will watch later. So just welcome, and especially welcome to Allison after all this. First, a little brief housekeeping. For those of you attending by Zoom, please use the chat feature to submit comments or questions at any time during the presentation. Cynthia will address them at the end of the presentation. For those of you attending in person, please hold your questions and comments until the end of the presentation. And we'll be sure that everybody, Zoom or in person, can hear all the questions and comments that are made. It's my pleasure to introduce Allison O'Sullivan, who works to connect people with land in a mutually beneficial and ecologically healthy way. Her studies in anthropological sciences at Stanford University introduced her to the terrace subsistence agriscape of the Peruvian Andes. Her professional experiences include farming organic vegetables and fruit, maintaining ornamental, edible, and native plantscapes for diverse clientele, directing multiple nonprofit organizations, inclusive farm and garden-based education programs, and using permaculture design techniques as a Peace Corps volunteer to generate income through agricultural activities in rural communities in Ghana and West Africa. For the last 12 years, she has been gardening in the Pacific Northwest. And now she works as a supervisor for the Urban Forestry Division of Portland Parks and Recreation. As an anthropologist, an ISA certified arborist, ISA qualified tree risk assessor, horticulturalist, and a self-proclaimed hungry gardener, she is highly intrigued about how people interact with their environment and how we shape it to be aesthetically beautiful and functional from the ground level to the canopy. Allison, thank you for sharing your deep and extensive knowledge with us this morning. Thanks for having me.
Turn myself on.
Okay, can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I am Allison O'Sullivan. I do live just outside of Portland, Oregon, a little town called Damascus. And I am lucky enough to have 1.25 acres out there that came with mature Asian pear and cherry trees. And then name a fruit or vegetable, and I bet you I've planted it since moving in. I've been there since fall of 2020. My folks, Terry and Evangeline O'Sullivan, live here on the island, and just giving them a shout out. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. So today we're going to talk about edible landscaping. So, see, I was warned that it may not work right away. You tell me.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So a lot of times when we think about edible landscaping, well, let me just say there's lots of ways to think about edible landscaping, right? Like at the end of the day, a lot of plants are edible. I mean, different parts of plants are edible. However, most of us don't live in what I would call a truly edible landscape, in that we often have our orchard in the back 40. We often have our herbs right off of our kitchen door. And we often have, you know, an area partitioned off where we're growing our veggies. And that's great. I mean, we are very organized. And today, you might not learn any new plants. You might not even learn new gardening techniques. But what I hope you come away with today is a change of perspective and maybe an open mind about where you're putting the plants that you like to eat and drink, okay, within your landscape. So one idea of a edible landscape is a food forest. This is like a really intensive edible landscape. It's like where you are working with all of these layers. Let's see if this, oh, there we go. The tall tree layer, the low tree layer, the shrub layer, the herb layer, the ground cover layer, the vine layer, and the root layer. And you are just really layering food in as much as you can. So in this picture, I'm not sure how well y'all can read this, so I'll read them out. So this is, there's a bay tree. Eventually that bay tree is gonna be a huge bay tree. We've got willow, we've got black currant, strawberries, asparagus, rhubarb, calendula, broadbean, nasturtium, sage, and then here's our ornamental, our nice hydrangea. So this is not for everyone, because why? Well, because of all the plants that are out there, plants that are edible, that make something that we have to harvest, that's work, that's time, right? And I don't know, I like to eat multiple times a day, but I also like to do other things. So that's a food forest. So we're talking about edible landscaping today, right? So when I think about edible and plants, I love berries. This is a service berry tree. This woman is picking the service berry. This is actually a service berry tree that sprouted itself, probably from birds, in a New York public garden, and people are eating off of it because that's what we do, right? So lots of animals like to eat things, right? There's a bear. I mean, it truly probably does live in an edible landscape, but we don't. We're people. So oftentimes when we think of a landscape, we think of kind of this situation, like a nice formal lawn. We got a nice pathway. We have our beautiful hedge that we've sheared. We have our other shrub that we've sheared. Maybe this is I'm not quite sure what that is, but we've got some evergreen things going on. We've got our big tall canopy. We've got our nice back row of trees, and that's lovely. We probably have some herbaceous perennials up here. That's great. I'd live in that house if that was mine. But I might start to take away some of this grass. I might start to think about how when I walk out my door, instead of seeing just this beautiful evergreen shrub, maybe I want to pick a berry or two, right? So that's what we're going to think about today, is how can we change that kind of landscape and maybe not get quite to the bear's landscape, but somewhere in between. So we're all gardeners here, right? We garden. That's why we're here. I personally love to grow plants that in some way I can eat. I also really like beautiful plants just for their aesthetics that I never intend on putting inside my mouth. So when we think of gardening edible plants, though, we often think of kind of this situation. This is actually a spot I lived. This was grass. This kind of looks, well, the house isn't as fancy. It was a barn. I lived in a barn, but the, in front of that barn was just grass. I got to live there for, I think, 5 years, and I turned it into my garden in the front. So, I got, I didn't actually eat the sunflowers. I did eat the seeds. I got some peppers here. I've got my little row of nigella. I think I had my tomatoes over here. So right out my door, here's my veggie garden, right? I think this is when I kind of started thinking about edible landscaping. Like, how can I just walk out in my yard and put something in my mouth really quickly? So that's another view of it. So yeah, that was one experiment. I did leave some grass on the side there, as you can see. And getting up closer, I don't think many of these plants are edible. This is a little Sangocaco maple I put in. But underneath, I would sow lettuce annually. I would put broccoli in the shadier spot. And that was part of my landscape for a while. And I call that gardening, but I think it's leaning towards edible landscaping. This is another way that we garden, right? Sometimes we'll have our more formal landscaping, our ornamentals close up to our house, and then we'll pick a spot. Sometimes we call it a postage stamp, right? On our lawn, and we'll box it in, and that's great. It helps keep the weeds out. It helps keep us focused. We can put the better soil there. We can really focus our time and energy, and that's where our food is. And that is also gardening, and that is great. I'm not here to critique. I'm just here to talk today. So another way that we grow plants is through farming. And often we think of farming when we have a larger landscape and we're doing more kind of big rows of often the same types of plants. Of course, there is, mixed vegetable farming. There's all sorts of farming, but, often we think of farming like this. So how can we get, farming and gardening and a little bit of that black bear berry situation into our everyday lives? Well, I think we can do that if we think about edible landscaping. So here's this person here, they're really happy to eat something, right? I've never found a donut plant, but pointing towards one, I think it'd be fun to grow. I actually don't really like donuts that much, but I think that'd be a cool plant. So when I'm thinking about edible landscaping, I like to think about, and I would like you all to think about, what do I like to eat or drink, right? At the end of the day, I'm spending my energy cultivating the soil. At the end of the day, if we're growing anything, we're really soil farmers, right? That's all we're doing. We're tending to the soil, we're making it produce something. It just depends what seed we put in there. So what do I like to eat or drink? Well, I actually don't want a donut plant. No, that's not for me. I actually really like, what do I like to eat and drink, and what can I grow in my landscape, right? Because we obviously have certain parameters. Well, for me, this is my current space. This is that farm I was talking about out in Damascus. So these are, you may be able to tell, these are currants. These are some of the first plants I put in. That's a little dwarf mulberry right there. Here's, one of my first currant harvests. So, here is my orchard that was established in the back 40. And in between, I've got this little flower field. But once again, just a patch of grass. And I said, well, we'll kind of get to this point in a while, but I walk back here. I have to walk by this to get to my pears. I'll tell you what, sometimes that walk is longer than I want it to be. Sometimes I need a snack. So right about now, my currants are fruiting up. They're all a little green, and pretty soon they'll turn into their colors and they'll get sweet. And I will for sure be grabbing handfuls of those as I'm going to tend the rest of my land. So this is kind of what I consider edible landscaping. And with edible landscaping, there's lots of different types of parts of plants that we can think about harvesting, right? We can think about harvesting edible flowers, edible berries, fruit and nut trees, herbs, and of course, vegetable plants. Now you could throw in any other number of categories here. You didn't talk about roots. Well, I'm considering them part of veggie plants, So just want you to be thinking about all the different types of food that's out there that we can grow. So speaking of edible flowers, like I said, you might not learn any new flowers here, but these are some of my favorite edible ones. Here's our nice bachelor button, our dianthus, our calendula, and all these are in my yard here. And then here is my nice witch hazel. Now, how is witch hazel edible? Well, you can make an astringent out of it. You can make a tincture. Once we start getting into plant medicine, it's a wide variety of plants. But also, this witch hazel, it's right off my driveway. There was a big photinia there that was dying of leaf spot, the only photinia in the world dying of leaf spot. And it was not happy. And so I ripped it out and started putting in witch hazels in this area. It's really makes me happy. It gives me winter interest. And I can go out and I can harvest those little flowers and make a nice medicinal tincture for myself and my friends and family. So we got edible flowers and we got berries. So of course, I was talking about how I love berries. This is like my version of myself, like that blackberry eating the berries. This is my big blueberry bush. And so, it's beautiful. Even if it didn't have fruit, I would love it. That's right off my back porch. In the summer, I walk straight out there, eat a bunch of berries. In the fall, apparently I stand in front and pose because it's really pretty. And year round, it provides a little screening, and it's just one of my favorite plants. Obviously some other berries we all know. Here's those currants I was talking about, strawberries, and we'll talk more about how to think of them in your landscape. So flowers, berries, fruit and nut trees. Let's see what we got. Well, of course we got to show off the plums. And here's my little Asian pears. They're growing up there. Ideally, they're too far away. If I got to do the whole landscape over, I'd bring it much closer in. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And then the herbs, of course, You know, first thing you gotta do when you're a gardener is put your herbs in, right? Cause they'll be there forever. So our nice sage, our chives, our lavender. Can you find the little kitty? She loves that spot too. There she is. Yeah, that's Tiger Lily. And then, of course, we've got our veggies, the meat of the plants, right? So once again, I'm showing close-ups of plants you all know because I want you to see them not just as food, but as for their beauty too, right? I mean, this is gorgeous. If anyone gave me a bouquet of red sorrel, I would accept it. I would love it. I might munch on it if I wanted something really tart, you know? To me, it is one of my favorite things to walk right off my porch and see peppers growing. They're absolutely beautiful plant. We all know kale, and we all know there's technically ornamental kale, but I say any kale is ornamental. Look at it. I'd like to find beauty in the ordinary things. So with edible landscaping, another way we can think about it, in addition to, you know, straight up landscaping and gardening and farming, is we can sprinkle in a little bit of permaculture. And I'm a certified in permaculture design 20 years ago. I took it was a month-long course, and it really changed my perspective about how to think about navigating through and interacting with any landscape. So y'all might be familiar with Bill Mollison and this permaculture book. I've obviously given it some love over time, so it needs a little help. But if you're ever, you know, this is a pretty thick read, but if you ever want to dive deep into permaculture, I would highly recommend that. And today we'll talk a little bit about some of the different principles of permaculture that I'm applying to edible landscaping. So this is a pretty classic kind of permaculture way of thinking about a landscape. And some of y'all may be familiar with this. So, you know, zone 0 is like the self. It's where you're spending most of your time in your own body, in your home. And then you go out and the zones go up in number. And really it's about things being, you know, kind of most energy intensive and also most accessible to things being plants, being less energy intensive for you to care for, and maybe more long-term, right? So back here, you've got your timber, you've got your trees that are growing and they're doing their thing, and you're not really harvesting them for 50 years and then you'll make a big buck, right? And you know, here you've got your veggie gardens and maybe your chickens, and then you've got, you know, your zones in between, maybe your orchard somewhere here. And that's great. And that's a way to think about interacting with land. And, you know, people call that permaculture, and I do too. And I like to pull principles from permaculture and apply them. So maybe you've heard of the stacking functions. So stacking functions, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's like this. It's like, I kind of have a neighbor I kind of like, but sometimes I don't want to see that neighbor all the time. So I think I need like a privacy fence or something. Okay, but I also really like to eat corn. And I don't really have the budget to buy a whole fence. Great, I'm gonna go ahead and put my cornfield right on the edge of my property where it blocks me from that neighbor for like at least, you know, 5 months of the year. You know, even when you're done harvesting the corn, you can keep it standing there for a long while. And then during the winter, when everyone's going inside and you're not seeing that neighbor as much, you know, you can chop it down and there you got your view again, right? So that's how I like to think about edible landscaping and applying something, a principle like stacking functions. So thinking about one need that you have, another need that you have, and how they can overlay, right? That's what that's all about. Edge space. This is another principle of permaculture that I like to apply. Actually meant for the other part of the picture to show up first, so we'll bring that up. So going back to this kind of paradigm for thinking about interacting with a landscape, this in permaculture is what we would call the edge space. So this is, you know, this is the edge of your property, and right over here is where you kind of might forget about it. Maybe it's where you like dump your compost over, dump your wheelbarrow over, right? Maybe it's where you kind of stack up all the woody debris. It's maybe a spot that's being used, but maybe a little underused. And maybe sometimes you even forget about it, and then the brambles grow over it, and then it's not even your space anymore. It's kind of that edge space, right? So what I like to do is utilize that edge space, be really intentional about that edge space. So here in the design, they've put, some kind of tree. Maybe it's a fruit tree. Here in my design, you can kind of see here, these are, I have some big, tall, mature Doug firs. And in between the Doug firs and the septic, that's what I call an edge space. So what have I done? I've planted a little pawpaw tree, right? Because a pawpaw tree, it is native to America. It is a cool looking tree. It has beautiful foliage that kind of looks tropical to me. I like to pretend I'm in tropical spaces when I'm in Damascus. It does grow a fruit that maybe some of y'all have eaten. It's almost like eating custard out of a fruit that kind of looks like a mango. And when it's young, it needs to be an understory, but as it grows up, it likes to find the light. So it is on the south side of the Doug firs, kind of hidden in between a cherry tree, the septic tank, and a Doug fir. And it's just a spot where creeper plant was growing, and maybe a little snowberry. But I said, I think I want something that in a few years I'll be able to harvest. So that's what I think about when I think about edge space. And I would like each of you to think about, what are the edge spaces that you have right now? I bet you have some pretty cool edge spaces that maybe you haven't seen in a while. And what could you intentionally put there just to make it more lively for yourself, to make it more inviting? I love my little pawpaw. So another principle is mimicking nature. So here we are in this pine forest, and what's growing down here are a bunch of blueberries, right? So we can take lessons from nature all the time. I love going hiking in the Mount Hood National Forest, and underneath the pine trees, there are a ton of huckleberries. So at my place, oops, I didn't get a picture of that one, but underneath my big Scotch pines, I went ahead and put the blueberries in there, just down from the witch hazel that replaced the dying Photinia. There was just some irises that weren't doing super well underneath those pine trees, ripped them out, put a bunch of blueberries underneath there, and they're really happy. So we can learn lessons from nature. Another great principle of permaculture, which I really love, is the problem is the solution, right? So it's just a change in perspective. Basically, it means if you have too much of something and that's not helping you, how can you turn it into something that is working for you, right? So here we all have a spot in our yard that is a problem. Why is it so wet in that spot? Maybe that's a spot where maybe you have clay soil. Maybe it was wet when there was some heavy equipment around and it compacted it. Who knows? I don't know the backstory of all your problem spots, but we all have problem spots, right? So what permaculture is about, what edible landscaping is about noticing what you have too much of and turning that problem into the solution. Well, cranberries, they do grow in a bog. They don't mind if it's a little bit compacted. So that would be a great spot to throw in a little creeping cranberry and have yourself a nice little cranberry patch. Why not? Better than soggy, wet lawn. Okay, another principle of permaculture is that everything gardens. So what does that mean? Well, it means we all garden in here. And it means to kind of cut yourself some slack, right? Like gardening is kind of being in rough draft. I was talking with someone just before this, and they were saying how they pulled out some flowers to put in some Asian greens, and the seeds haven't sprouted yet, but maybe some will come up. I said, yeah, some will and some won't, right? I mean, gardening is not personal. You can do your best, you put the best soil, the exact right seed that was, the provenance from Orcas Island, it's like made for this area, and it could still not grow, right? And it's not because you don't have a green thumb, it's just because there's other things out there. Everything's gardening, so there's a nice little other bunch of sorrel, and here's this little rabbit here. You've done your best, you put up your fence, doesn't matter. That little rabbit is also gardening. And they're really thanking you because you're their head gardener. So this is really just about cutting yourself some slack and also appreciating the little things, you know, when you're deciding to put in the violet along your pathway as a nice ground cover instead of weeding out the annual ryegrass that always creeps its way into those little cracks. Go ahead and do that. Throw some violet seed. It'll outcompete that ryegrass, and then you know who may come? A little frog. Because everything gardens, and that little frog is finding a little spot to find its little insects. So you've made a nice hunting ground. And then of course, there is this situation. What's this person saying? These caterpillars are catastrophic for my garden. Yeah, so you know, we're gonna have some bumps, we're gonna have some pests, but that's when we learn and grow. And just remember that you're not the only one gardening out there. Everyone is, meaning everyone is foraging. The little critters and the slightly bigger little critters. All right, so this is not a permaculture principle. This is an Allison principle. I think in all gardens, there should be a spot to relax and a spot to chill. And I call that the chillaxation style. I am now in my mid-40s and I cannot do what I could do in my mid-20s. I can only imagine when I get to be in my mid-60s and my mid-80s, I will still be gardening, but my chillaxation station might continue to get bigger. So all that is finding a spot in your yard where there's already some shade and where you would like to sit. It can be as simple as, hey, next time we're at the nursery, sweetie, why don't we buy a glider or a bench for putting underneath our fruit tree, right? Like maybe you're asking yourself, I have so much fruit on this tree and I'm never eating it. Well, maybe it's because you're not hanging out there because you don't have a bench in your chillaxation station. So, you know, find a way to make yourself linger. That's what this is about. You know, when we mimic, if we're trying to mimic nature, if we're trying to stack functions, we need time to observe and think. We need time to sit in the garden. And it's great if you're sitting underneath a fruit tree, because then you can snack too, which is the whole principle of edible landscaping. So whatever your chillaxation station looks like, I highly encourage you to create one in your edible landscape. So this is what we're talking about: stacking functions, using that edge space, mimicking nature, giving yourself time to observe so that you can mimic nature. Remembering that the problem is the solution. Everything gardens, so don't worry if something gets eaten or something gets dug up. My dog thinks I'm the head gardener. You know, the dog is property owner, and my dog tells me when I should transplant things all the time. Okay, works out sometimes. Sometimes she chooses a better spot. And remember to give yourself time and space for a chillaxation station. Okay, so we're gonna go through a few more ideas, then we'll look at some plants, I promise. So once you've kind of got your mindset with those principles, first thing you have to do is some observation. Then you need to think about what your flow is through your landscape. How do you interact with your landscape? Are you a busy body? Or are you the person who gets the wheelbarrow out of the shed and then lays in the wheelbarrow? You know, we all have different moments. So what's your energy level? What are your goals? Are you trying to like be a subsistence edible landscaper? Everything you put in your mouth comes from your yard. Or are you looking to like fill one spot with one plant that you would like to maybe sometimes eat? You know, what are your goals? What's your maintenance plan? Don't get in over your head, right? Because there's no reason to make yourself frustrated with your garden. So think through what your maintenance plan is. Wait for it. Before planting. Before planting, think through your maintenance plan. Think through your harvest plan. Fruit that is not harvested is just litter. We say fruit feeds the forest floor. Yes, it does. And it also gets squishy. And it also attracts flies. And it also gets slippery. If you're not harvesting it, it's not really an edible landscape. It's like annoying, right? So think through your harvest plan. You know, do you have a family that you can invite over that weekend in June when your cherry tree that you've so perfectly placed is fruiting? Do you have neighbors you can invite over? Is there a Girl Scout or Boy Scout troop you could invite over? What are your resources and how can you have a good harvest plan? And then get to plant selection. I think a lot of people do this in opposite order. They think about a plant that they really want, and then they don't really get to observe it or enjoy it. So starting with observation. So this is what I'm talking about with observation. You know, in addition to kind of observing just nature in general, what's going on at your site? You know, where is your cool, moist spot? Where's your wind? You know, where would you maybe want a hedgerow to stop that wind? What's your hot and dry spot? Where do you want to plop in your peppers and your tomatoes? You know, just know what you got going on. Where's your slope? Here we are in East Sound. This is the USDA hardiness zones. I'm sure as gardeners, y'all are all familiar with this. You're probably all familiar that our climate is changing. And so what I found really interesting here in East Sound, it says in 2012, the hardiness zone was actually 8B, 15 to 20 degrees. So plants had to be able to sustain down to 15 degrees. And now in 2023, it changed to 9A. So they're saying now, I know you had 6 degrees this winter. Don't worry, I heard about it. But in general, the climate is getting warmer. In general, some things that were on the edge of our hardiness zone that were strictly for California or maybe Southern Oregon, you can grow here now in our beautiful rain shadow of the San Juan Islands. But it's good to remember that, you know, plants don't read the hardiness zone when a storm comes and when inclement weather comes. So if you plant that loquat tree that's on the edge of our hardiness zone and you know 10-degree weather is coming, you better get that wool blanket out and give your nice little loquat tree a little wraparound, you know, or you better think about placing it in your very, very warmest spot that you have by all your hardscape, right? If you're going to be pushing those zones, otherwise you might be sad if it dies from the frost, right? So these obviously are real parameters that any gardener has to think about when selecting plants. Now, your flow energy, are you Mighty Mouse? Are you like, I get all energy all the time, I'm just gonna do everything? Or, you know, are you just hanging out and trying to hide from your kids in your garden? And then, you know, maybe you'll barbecue under the shade of your tree, but you're not really gonna grow much. Either one is okay. Just know who you are and what you can accomplish. What are your goals? Like I said, maybe your goal is, I want one espaliered cherry tree. That's all I've ever wanted in my life. Okay, great, make it happen. Put it in a spot where you also want a little screen. Put it in a spot where you're also going to be able to sit out and enjoy the bees going to pollinate it when it's flowering, right? Because some of the great things about edible landscaping are not just eating the fruit, but getting to see the plant through the whole year and what other gardeners come by to visit it, right? One of my favorite things is sitting out underneath my pear and cherry trees and watching the bees go pollinate it. I thank them. Or, you know, are you this person who's like, you want to walk out your fence and immediately run into 15 different edible plants? That could be. It could be. What is your maintenance plan? Is it you and the old man? Are y'all doing it? Good. But take your time and know that that's what's going on, and maybe think about hiring this young buck. Yeah, he looks like he might come in handy sometimes. So, you know, there's no critique about how you do your maintenance, but just, you know, be able to know if you're going to do it yourself or if you're going to need help. What's your harvest plan? Are you just like, I'm just going to graze? A lot of people just graze. the food never even makes it into the kitchen. Doesn't even make it onto the front porch, you know? Or are you, what I was talking about before, you have the best intentions, you know, you planted 15 apple trees, all different varieties, so they're all plopping throughout the entire apple season, and you brought your orchard ladder out, and that's as far as you got, you know? What is your harvest plan? Yeah, I go for that one. Oh, that one's sticking around. Plant selection. Oh, there we go. Not sure what's happening there. Oh, I forgot to change those pictures. That's sad. Well, anyways, this is when we finally get to plant selection. And, you know, I didn't put a bunch of we're gonna look at a bunch of pictures of plants, but I know you have nurseries here. We were just talking about, I'm gonna have to go check out that little farm over by Innisfil Bay. I haven't seen that. I haven't been to that nursery yet. And then I know I was trying to coordinate with Bullock's farm. They weren't able to come today, but I know they got stuff going on, and you got other great nurseries here. This is one of my favorite nurseries. And like I said, you know, when it comes to plant selection, already think through all those other ideas we talked about, and then sit down. Maybe you're sitting down in your chillaxation station. Maybe you make that first, and, you know, look through your plant catalogs and go from there. That's a really nice one I like. One Green World they are in Portland. I am biased. They do grow over 1,000 varieties of edible plants. I don't work for them. This is not a plug, but they have a great website, and they keep their website up to date, stock wise. So you know what they really have, and they'll ship anywhere, and they're good people. They donate to a lot of farms, around the Portland area when they have excess, plants. I'm sure y'all are familiar with Territorial. It's another Pacific Northwest seed. So y'all know these things, but I thought I'd just point out some of my favorites. Okay, so edible landscaping. So we decided I didn't want donuts. I'm thinking about what I like to eat and drink, and what I can grow in my landscape and handle with my own parameters. And we've already figured out that it's currants. So now we're just gonna look at a few examples of all of these different plants. So colorful borders, right? This is something we think about in plant design. And we'll often think about it with, oh yeah, we're gonna put some delphiniums, we're gonna put some nice perennial flowers in here. Maybe we'll have some peonies. Maybe we'll put in an evergreen shrub, maybe a Mexican orange or a choicea. I know I'm just naming off plants, but you know, you start to think about what you want in your border. Ground covers, you know, we think about all these native ground covers. What I want y'all to think about is, what are the plants that could satisfy all of these needs, but be edible? And then you decide, am I making that food forest? Am I doing like every single level and every single layer? Or am I just picking, okay, I want an edible ground cover, but nope, I'm sticking to my laurels and rhodies for my hedge and screen. I don't want to mess with fruit on the hedge. No, thank you. Shrubs. Do you just want your ornamental shrub? Do you want your beautiful azalea? Or do you maybe want a pineapple guava? Okay, we'll take a look at a few of them. Trees and shade and vines. So all the different ways that plants have their form, and which of these can be edible plants. Let's look at borders and ground covers. So I love mixing. Here's my calendula and peppers. I love mixing them. I like them to be right along my pathway. It brings a nice colorful border. They are annuals, so I do know that that's only, you know, during the growing season that I'm gonna see that beauty, but I'm okay with that. It's just a little strip. The rest of the year, I just wood chip it, and it just makes the path a little wider. I don't always grow the same thing there, but these are some good go-tos. All right, let's look at another one. Oh yeah, we talked about the cranberries already. So great thing about them is they are a perennial, they are a great ground cover, and they do make fruit. And you know, I don't have all the specs about what kind of soil they like, but y'all are gardeners, y'all can look up those little details. But you know, the cranberries do like a wetter spot. So if that's a problem for you, there's your solution. Of course, lemon balm. Now lemon balm, it's weedy, right? But sometimes it's good to know your enemies. you know? A spot that is gonna be weedy, unless you put something else there, it's always, those weeds are always gonna come back. That seed bank is there, right? So for me, I really like my weeds to be lemon balm. I like my weeds to be mint. I like my weeds to be fill in the blank. Plants that I know I can use a little bit, and when I need to, I can cover them with cardboard and get rid of them real quick. So that's just one idea. You can make a really delicious summer drink with lemon balm. You can add it to tinctures and salves. So it's something that's handy to have around. And when it gets too big, you chop it down, go get your Amazon box, throw it on, walk away. It won't bother you anymore. It'll be out of sight, out of mind. Mint, same thing. Mint can for sure run and be invasive, but know your enemies and know what they're good for. You invite me over for a mint julep, I would love it. We need mint for that. So there it is. So these are all ground covers. These are all things you grow already, but I'm just having you think about how they could be your ground cover. If you have a bare spot, you have a weedy spot, you want something low, maybe oregano. Maybe that's where you should be putting your oregano. Maybe that's where you should put a squash plant this summer. It will really sprawl depending on which kind of squash you choose, and you will immediately have shaded out a whole bunch of those weeds that were there. And then maybe next year you use that spot where you're going to put in some shrub. Maybe it'll be an edible shrub like a currant, or maybe it'll be a Daphne, that's your choice. But you can use this annual squash as a nice ground cover for part of the year. And of course, strawberries. We all know the woodland strawberries, the alpine strawberries. Those are great. That's a great ground cover. Why not grow a different cultivar of strawberry that's going to make a slightly bigger strawberry that you might really enjoy eating? So just different ways to think about plants you might already be putting in your raised garden bed. Go ahead and let them run out of the bed, run onto the ground, and run themselves wild. And you can still harvest a little bit as you like. Thyme. We all know thyme is a great ground cover, and there's so many different kinds. That's what I love about this. You got your lemon thyme, you have your what they actually call the creeping thyme, which doesn't have as much flavor or scent to it. It's kind of more an ornamental. And then you've got your thyme vulgaris, which is really potent. You use that on all your marinades with your chicken and your carrots and whatever, and it makes a beautiful ground cover too. So like I said, you might not learn any plants today, but maybe you'll think about them differently. I mentioned this already, those spots. I feel like violet is the best, not just for a ground cover, but for those spots in hardscape where there's cracks, where the little bitter cress is getting in, the little popper plant, or maybe a different weed that you don't want, like maybe poppies are coming in there. You don't want the poppies. Try out the violets. They're not quite as invasive, and they're really beautiful. And they're even hardy. So sometimes they can overwinter. They'll definitely seed themselves and eventually fill in pathways to great ground cover. If you have a really, really wet spot, like let's say you have a little creek running, you could even try some watercress. I don't know how much watercress you're going to be able to eat because it's very, very spicy, but it is an edible, it is tasty, and it's just another way that you can manage a super wet area. So let's think about, we got one more here, wintergreen. So just another ground cover. The edible part on this, y'all may know, is the little fruits. It's not going to give you a ton, but maybe that's what you want. But it is a little evergreen perennial, and it is absolutely delicious. If you've never tasted a little wintergreen berry, it's like the best breath freshener ever. And it's a really happy plant that also shows winter interest. So we went over the borders and the ground covers together, and we'll just quickly look at some ideas of hedges or a screen, shade, or trees, shrubs, and vines. So all these different ways that plants grow. So there's your apple tree. I mean, if you want to exfoliate it, you can have a nice screen. If you want to grow it tall, you've got nice shade. And you know, apple tree, you could switch that out for any other fruit tree that you best like. But if you're deciding, I highly encourage you to decide where your chillaxation station is first. Because once you establish that, you can sit there and make all the other hard decisions. So that's where you can go and think about, what's that one fruit tree I want? Or maybe the 3 that you want. I did throw in a couple plants y'all might not know about. I never knew about this until I did, which is just a few years ago over at Point Arboretum over in Portland. We've got some of these grown by the visitor center. So it's a blue bean tree. It is hardy here. Some people also, it is a deciduous tree, so it's not an evergreen, but it's an interesting tree. You know, it's got this nice compact leaf. And like I said, edible landscaping, you're still landscaping, right? So you're still looking for things that are aesthetically beautiful to you to put in your landscape, but you're also thinking about if they have any food to offer, and these do. It's also called the dead man's fingers fruit because it's I don't know what it looks like, but it makes these beautiful fruits. You know, it's the kind of fruit that you definitely graze. But it's just an interesting thing. You might think about adding that to your landscape. And those are all available in these, you know, nursery catalogs that I was talking about. Of course, we know blueberry. We already talked about that. I just think a lot of people will make, you know, all their blueberries all the way over there when you could walk out your door and have one blueberry here. You could walk down your path a little bit more and have another blueberry there. They're an absolutely beautiful plant that grows really well in our region, does provide fruit, but doesn't take up all the space and all the time. Here's another interesting one. Some of y'all may know, this is the Akebia, the chocolate vine. So it is an evergreen vine. So another thing, if you're looking for a screen or you've got an area where you really want a vining plant, consider this Akebia. It does make little fruit. Let me see if I got the fruit there. Kind of looks like the blue bean, but it's not. They are different, just a little sweeter. And there's the beautiful flower of the Akebia or chocolate vine as well. Comes in different varieties. It's a really cool plant. We're almost at the end here. Cherries. I just love cherries, so I had to put them in here. Oh, talking about nuts. Well, of course, we got the filbert nut. The good thing about them, they can actually grow in full shade too. You just won't get as many nuts. But partial to full sun, you will get nuts. And they're, you know, they are deciduous, so they're not an evergreen. They won't get too big. But it's a nice little bit of shade. It's a tree and you get a little nut if you like. And then of course we all know grapes. And I just think grapes are some of the things that frustrate gardeners the most, because they get wild and out of control. But think about, where do you want that wild out of controlness? Where do you want a plant to just take over? Put a grape there. Or are you the kind of gardener who is going to diligently do the grape pruning every winter and do the pruning multiple times in the summer? Great, then maybe you are the kind of person who wants the grape on a trellis and you'll actually use it as a screening or a hedge. But I feel like grapes get a bad rap, so I try to give them some love. And oh, yep, can't forget lavender. Lavender, it's one of our lovely ornamental bushes, ornamental shrubs. Some people call it an ornamental perennial. Whatever you call it, plant it. It brings a ton of great pollinators. It's evergreen. People forget that. And it doesn't get too big. There's a ton of different varieties. And then you can throw a little lavender into water, make lavender water. You can take some and put it on your fish. You'll be like the culinary queen. It's amazing. Olive trees. Olive trees are hardy here. We do have Mediterranean climate. They can grow in partial to full sun. They are evergreen. I like to highlight things that are evergreen because those really, you get a lot of bang for your buck in the garden world, you know? So next time you're thinking about, oh, I could see something going there in that spot while you're sitting in your chillaxation station, maybe something 20 foot tall, maybe up to 12 foot wide, bing, you want an olive tree. It will make some fruit. but not too much if you don't have too many olive trees. This is one I was talking about, the pineapple guava. This is another evergreen shrub. Some people consider it a small tree. It is hardy. It looks tropical. Its name sounds tropical, but it can grow here. I have some in my yard as a hedge, and this is the flower it makes. The petals are edible. They taste like cotton candy. They're real sweet and really yummy if you like that. And then the fruit, it's more of like a kind of a sweet pineapple, but not too pineapple-y. I'll let you taste it. Yeah, but they do make these little pods. They're about ping pong ball size. So they're really good. And last but not least, when you want to put in a big evergreen tree, consider pinyon. Why not? You will get the cones. I mean, how much are pine nuts in the store? They're real expensive. Yeah. So, it'll take time, but we got time. And this tree, it can get 50 foot tall. It can get 20 foot wide. So know what you're getting yourself into. I wouldn't put it in a pot on your patio, but when next time you're picking your big trees that you want, consider an edible tree, large form. Of course, rosemary, we have to show rosemary because just like lavender, it's one of our really common herbs. People also don't always remember how beautiful it is, how evergreen it is, how much the pollinators love it. And it can kind of be that's kind of a little wild, or you can make a rosemary hedge. You can have a real formal, you can really shear that thing and give it your formal garden look, whatever is your flavor. Or you can get the crawling one, the creeping one, and make it your ground cover. So just some ideas there. That's what I have to offer to y'all today. And if nothing else, I hope that you plant something soon. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if there are any questions. I probably left you with more questions than information, but if there are any, I'm happy to take any. 100%.
Yes, is there any other way to use the lemon balm besides as a tea?
Yes. So if y'all are familiar with a salve or like a chapstick, so if you are crafty and want to melt down some beeswax and some olive oil, there's recipes online. It's really not that difficult. I just recommend getting a double burner for your wax. Otherwise, you might start a fire. But if you make a salve, which is like a cream for healing or for dry skin, you can put lemon balm in there, and it has lemon balm is a little antiseptic, so it's good for healing little wounds. So after you go out in your garden, then you're gonna want to use that salve. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Anything else?
I might have missed it, but have you ever grown orich?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Have you grown orich?
Orange?
Orich.
Oric. Yes, I think in my mind I call it Oric, but I don't know. Are we talking about the spinach green?
Yeah, the purple.
Yes.
It grows great.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so my understanding, it's an annual, and it's a beautiful, I think it's in the spinach family. But yeah, that's another beautiful plant that's sure, we can put it out in the rows with the lettuce, in the rows with the veggies, or we could put it in the pot on the patio where we can enjoy it and just kind of nibble at it or harvest it. Yeah.
Right, I think it was called mountain spinach. And
Nice.
it reseeds itself really well. So and then you can pull it out if you don't need it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Yep.